Some stories start with a family's dream of a new life, but then take a turn you could never, ever see coming. This is one of those stories. We're going to dive into a custody case that's about so much more than just one family. It's about a clash of cultures, of laws, and really, the very identity of a child caught right in the middle of it all.
We are not living life. We are just passing the time to get our baby back. Just let that sink in. That's a quote from Ariha's mother, Dhara, and honestly just perfectly captures the absolute heart of this story. A family's entire existence just put on pause, all for the fight to bring their little girl home.
So how does this even happen? How does a precautionary trip to the hospital, something any loving parent would do, spiral into an international custody battle that's been going on for years? It seems impossible, right? Well, to figure that out, we have to rewind and go right back to the beginning.
Okay, so let's start with the Shah family. They were, just like so many others, looking for new opportunities, a new life abroad. A journey that really began with so much hope, but it took a very, very different turn.
So you have Bhavesh, he's a software engineer from India, and his wife Dhara. They packed up their lives in 2018 and moved to Berlin. He had great job opportunity and they were ready to start this exciting new chapter. And for a while, everything was going exactly to plan.
All right, this timeline shows you just how fast a life can unravel. Ariha was born in Berlin in February of 2021. Just 7 months later, on September 23rd, her grandmother was visiting and accidentally injured her while they were playing. Later that day, her parents noticed a bit of blood in her diaper. So they did what any of us would do. They rushed her to the hospital just to be safe. But that hospital visit, that's where everything changed. Doctors there suspected abuse. German child services, known as the Jugendamt, were called in. And just like that, they took 7-month-old Ariha into their custody.
And boom, suddenly, the Shahs were completely entangled in a foreign legal system, one they barely understood, fighting to get their own child back from the very people they had turned to for help.
And this, right here, this is the absolute core of the whole conflict. On one side, you have the parents. They're adamant this was a small, accidental injury, and that taking her to the hospital was just them being responsible parents. But on the other side, you've got the German authorities. Based on what the doctors reported, they suspected the absolute worst, serious abuse, and they acted immediately to protect the child. Two completely opposite interpretations of the exact same event.
So with Ariha taken from them, she was placed with foster parents. And just so we're all on the same page, this is a system where the government puts a child into the care of a certified private family. It's supposed to be a temporary solution while everything gets sorted out.
What happened next is just a mind-bending legal maze. The police launched a criminal investigation. But by February 2022, they closed the case, dropped all the charges. Why? Lack of evidence. So you'd think, okay, nightmare's over, right? Nope. The Shahs go back to court, police report in hand, and their request to get their daughter back is denied. Then, get this, a court-appointed psychologist evaluates them and finds them to be perfectly stable. And still, the court refuses to return Ariha. It's just baffling.
So as the legal case just dragged on, this whole other layer of conflict started to bubble up to the surface. A really deep and painful clash of cultures.
See, for the family, and eventually for the Indian government, this became about something much bigger. It was about protecting Ariha's entire identity. She's an Indian citizen, but she now speaks German, not her family's languages. Her parents are devout Jains, they're strictly vegetarian, but they're terrified she's being fed meat in foster care. Their biggest fear is that she's losing every single connection to her Indian heritage, to her culture, to who she is. And they argue this goes against the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which basically says every child has a right to preserve their own identity.
And this isn't some isolated, one-off incident. It really brings to mind a famous case from back in 2011 involving an Indian family in Norway. Common parenting practices, like feeding your child with your hands, were completely misinterpreted by the authorities as a sign of being an unfit parent. It just highlights this recurring pattern of cultural misunderstandings that can happen in Western child welfare systems.
So with the legal battles and the cultural clashes raging, it was almost inevitable, right? The case escalated, transforming from a private family tragedy into a full-blown diplomatic issue between two entire countries.
And what you have now are two governments completely at a standstill. India has been pleading for Ariha's return, arguing it's a humanitarian issue and that her fundamental rights as an Indian citizen are being violated. Germany, for its part, maintains its position that the government can't interfere. They say their judiciary is independent and this is a matter for the courts to decide, period.
And this quote from India's Foreign Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar, really sums it all up. He said, "It is essential that her cultural rights are ensured, and she grows up in Indian surroundings." That's India's official position in a nutshell. It's not just about getting a child back to her parents. It's about making sure she can grow up connected to her own country and her own culture.
So, after years of court battles, cultural debates, and intense diplomatic pressure, where does all of this leave the little girl at the very center of this storm?
5. Just let that number sink in for a second. Since she was taken into custody, Ariha Shah has been moved between 5 different foster homes. That is a staggering amount of instability for any child, let alone one who is still trying to form her sense of self and where she belongs in the world.
So let's look at where things stand today. Ariha is around 5 years old. She lives in German foster care, and her main language now is German. Her parents get to see her just once every 2 weeks, and even those short visits sometimes get canceled. Legally, she is still in the custody of German authorities. And get this, her mother is now learning German just so she can communicate with her own daughter during those brief meetings.
The reality is just, it's a painful stalemate. Bhavesh and Dhara Shah are not giving up. They're continuing their fight, using every media outlet, every diplomatic channel they can think of. But the heartbreaking truth is that with every day that passes, their daughter grows up farther and farther away from them, in a world that is not her own. And all of this leaves us with a final, really difficult question. A case like Ariha Shah's forces us to grapple with the messy realities of our modern, interconnected world. When a family moves to a new country, whose rules should prevail? Whose culture? Whose definition of a child's best interest is the right one? There are no easy answers here.